Tariffs on planes aren't just economic tools, they're political weapons in a global chess match between nations, corporations, and ideologies. I'm back here today ready to go deeper into the relationship between tariffs and the travel industry because this story isn't just about the prices or passenger perks. It's about power, about how the US, the EU, and rising players like China use aviation as a battlefield for economic dominance. And if we're going to fly smarter into the years ahead, we need to understand the political skies that we are flying through. Let's start with two giants that have dominated commercial aircraft manufacturing for decades, Boeing and Airbus. Boeing is the American aerospace powerhouse, while Airbus is the pride of the European Union. Together, they account for nearly 99% of all large commercial aircraft orders globally. And because each of these is backed by their respective government, their competition is rarely just about business. It's about trade policy, national interest, and global influence. The Boeing versus Airbus rivalry has been simmering since the 1970s, but things came to a head in the early 2000s when both the US and the EU filed complaints with the World Trade Organization, accusing each other of unfairly subsidizing their flagship aircraft manufacturers. The US claimed that the Airbus benefited from billions in launch aid from the EU governments, giving it an unfair advantage. The EU countered that Boeing received billions in indirect subsidies through tax breaks and government contracts. This wasn't just corporate finger pointing, these were full-blown international legal battles that lasted for over 15 years. And by 2019, the WTO finally allowed the US to impose tariffs on $7.5 billion worth of European goods, the largest award in the organization's history, and this included a 10% tariff on Airbus aircraft, which quickly jumped to 15% in 2020. The EU retaliated with tariffs of its own, targeting Boeing jets and a long list of other American exports. These weren't isolated moves, they were warning shots in a much bigger war, one that uses tariffs as a weapon to pressure foreign governments into compliance. And the airline industry, it became collateral damage. For example, Delta Airlines, a major US carrier, had already committed to purchasing Airbus A350s before the tariffs were enacted. But those aircraft became significantly more expensive to import, putting Delta at a financial disadvantage without warning. The executives argued publicly that they were caught in the crossfire of a government feud that they had no role in, and yet they and their passengers became the bearer of the cost. But the geopolitical games don't stop with Boeing and Airbus. There's a new player quietly entering the arena, COMAC, China's state-owned aerospace manufacturer. COMAC's flagship jet, the C-19, is designed to rival the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320, the most popular commercial aircraft on Earth. And while the C-919 hasn't been widely adopted yet, its development is significant. It represents China's attempt to become self-sufficient in an industry long dominated by Western powers. To achieve this, China has poured billions into subsidizing COMAC's research, development, and manufacturing, and that has sparked alarm bells in both Washington and Brussels, because if COMAC gains traction, especially in developing nations with fewer aviation safety barriers, it could reshape global aircraft markets and shift trade alliances. Now here's where tariffs come back into play. US lawmakers have already floated the idea of imposing tariffs on Chinese aircraft or parts if they begin to threaten domestic manufacturers. This would echo trade tensions we've seen in other industries like semiconductors and solar panels, where the US policy tries to curb China's growing influence through targeted taxes. But retaliatory tariffs can be a double-edged sword. So, for example, China is one of Boeing's largest markets, and if the US escalates tariffs on Chinese goods, Beijing could respond by halting or even delaying Boeing orders in favor of Airbus or domestic production. That would deal a massive financial blow to an already strained company, especially after the 737 crisis and the pandemic downturn. In other words, these aren't just bureaucratic skirmishes, they're battles with real consequences for jobs, routes, and even traveler experience. So what happens when airlines get caught in the middle? Some start lobbying governments directly to avoid further escalation, while others try to diversify their fleets or order parts early to beat tariff deadlines. But these are temporary solutions. Long-term carriers may begin favoring aircraft with domestic supply chains or even reducing international routes tied to tariff-affected goods. And here's a hidden danger. When aviation becomes a bargaining chip in the international disputes, innovation slows down. Airlines may delay upgrading to newer, more fuel-efficient aircraft, while safety improvements could also be stalled. And then the passengers once again end up paying more for less. This also complicates sustainability efforts. The push for greener aviation, from electric planes to sustainable aviation fuels, depends on global cooperation. But if tariffs make international collaboration harder, climate progress may take a backseat to political posturing. Let's not forget, we live in a highly interdependent world. The Airbus A350, for example, includes more than 4 million parts from over 30 countries. Every bolt, every sensor, and every seat is a vast, fragile ecosystem. And disrupt one node, say by adding a 25% tariff on avionics from Japan, then the entire system begins to shake. This is a new reality of modern aviation. It's not just about engineering, it's about diplomacy, it's about trade and national identity. In our final episode, we will explore the future. What happens if these tensions don't cool off? Will travelers be forced to choose airlines based on the country's trade policy? Could tariffs fragment the skies into politically divided zones? And most importantly, what can travelers, consumers, and citizens do to fly smarter in this uncertain world? It's true that the sky may be open, but the politics above us are anything but. At GUIKE GRIOT Travel Lifestyle, we break down the hidden forces shaping how you move. Whether it's through tariffs, tech, or travel trends, our goal is to help you make smarter decisions with every trip you take. If this episode gave you a new lens on global travel, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and check out our growing Smart and Safe travel series. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay ready for anything.